highly impressive book, A Poetical Rhapsody, by a certain Francis Davison. For the first time appeared in 1602, containing high-level sonnets, odes, madrigals, poems, pastorals, elegies, epigrams, epitaphs, epistles, etc. It was enlarged and reprinted in 1608. Again with new additions in 1611. And after complete new arrangements, the fourth edition in 1621 was published. It can hardly be overlooked that Francis Davison must have been one of the many masks of concealed and banished Christopher Marlowe. Let's elucidate this on the basis of the following indications. You should reflect, at least for yourself, the question, why up to now? Shakespeare Academia did not develop a reasonable theory of who Francis Davison, the author of A Poetical Rhapsody, might have been? Consider the contents of the astonishing poetical artistry. A. H. Bullen, in 1890, published letters of Francis Davison's correspondence from Italy, September to November 1596, with William Cecil, Anthony Bacon, Robert Devereux, E. Smith, Robert Cecil, Dudley Carleton. The connections to Philip Sidney, William Herbert, Anthony Bacon, the Earl of Essex, and others, are valid, but make only sense for Marlowe and his assumed stay in Italy, as virtual banished, anonymous Francis Davison. The initial dedication in the Rhapsody underscores the importance of the Sidney family to the author, as well as the author's capabilities to compose high-level, Shakespearean sonnets. Connections of Marlowe to Philip Sidney, to Mary Sidney and her two sons Philip and William, the dedicatees of the first folio, have amply been demonstrated. According to N. H. Nicholas, 1826, the author of the Poetical Rhapsody, Francis Davison, is, without a doubt, also the main author of the Masque of Proteus, and of the 6 speeches of the Counsellor. In Davison's Gesta Graeorum, in 1688. Be aware, Davison's Gesta Graeorum, printed in 1688, from a manuscript, passed down from 1594, is important for its unmistakable references to Shakespeare's The Comedy of Errors, performed December 28, 1594, and to Shakespeare's Love's Labour's Lost. Davison's extant handwritings, in the Poetical Rhapsody, are in accordance with handwritings of the true Shakespeare. That is the guise, in the Massacre of Paris, from Marlowe, or, Hand D, in the play Sir Thomas More, assumed, from Shakespeare? We learn from the title page of Davison's Gesta Graeorum, or The History of the High and Mighty Prince, Henry, who reigned and died, Anno Domini, 1594. Together with a masque, as it was performed, by His Highness command, for the entertainment of Queen Elizabeth, who, with the nobles of both courts was present thereat. The protagonist Proteus, a sea god in Greek mythology, had the ability to adapt and change his identity, analog to the true Shakespeare, that's Marlowe, or Davison. Be aware of Proteus' complex role in Shakespeare's The Two Gentlemen of Verona, but also of the true Shakespeare's characterization of Proteus in Henry VI. There, the Duke of Gloucester is expressing, I can add colors to the chameleon, change shapes with Proteus, for advantages, and set the murderess, Machiavel, to school. Can I do this, and cannot get a crown? Is it a coincidence that the prologue of Marlowe's play, The Jew of Malta, begins with Machiavel's extremely elusive speech? What may it mean that an undefined Secretary Davison, in 1633 publishes profitable travel instructions, together with two famous personalities, Philip Sidney and the Earl of Essex, both deceased more than 30 years ago? The death year of Davison not known. The Epistle of the Small Book, signed by B.F., gives neither a clue A. who B.F. may have been, nor B. why it was not signed by Davison himself, and C. that the third author, Davison, must have traveled a lot, similar to Essex and Sidney. Be aware, nothing reliable is known about Francis Davison. The only way to learn more about him, as a person, must be to try to extract more specific information out of the poetical Rhapsody, revised several times. Let's try this in the second part of this video. Davison is believed to be recognizable in Shakespeare's plays. His letter to William Cecil from Italy, November 1596, reminds us of similar reflections in Henry IV. Consider similar expressions on the flow of ebb and tide, moon, etc. we find in 14 plays and poems of Shakespeare. The sonnet, To Pity, begs for mercy, lamenting the fate of Davison. It reads, like a key to the final monologue of Shakespeare's play, The Tempest. There, Prospero is begging for mercy, expressing mercy itself, and frees all faults. As you from crimes would pardon be, let your indulgence set me free. Note: you find highly specific, Marlowean, complementarities, such as who ruin most, where most she should repair, and where she own most right, doth greatest wrong. In Davison's first edition, 1602, a year before Queen Elizabeth's death, the last lines indicate that he let Queen Elizabeth know that he is alive. Tell her, I live and living cry for grace. In the second edition, 1608, after the demise of Elizabeth, the last lines were strikingly altered, to and only live and living mercy cry, because her glory in my death will die. Do you see any other, possible or plausible, or better interpretation for Davison's Sonnet 5, entitled, To Pity? The similarity in terms of language and content to Shakespeare's play The Tempest is not an isolated case. It can be detected in other poems by Davison, such as in Sonnet 12. But, also with other definite poetical pseudonyms, of Marlowe alias Shakespeare, such as George Wither. Davison's Sonnet 12, comparison of his heart to a tempest-beaten ship, with little doubt represent the background and simile of the true Shakespeare's destiny, as well as the true Shakespeare's play, The Tempest. Can you see any other, possible, plausible, or better interpretation at all? In this sonnet for Davison's poetical comparison of his heart to a tempest-beaten ship? Davison's poem, A Living Death. What better way for my sorrow to declare, than that I dying live and cannot die? That dying still I am, and cannot die. Spiro, non vivo, that is, I breathe, not live. Are you able at all to see any other possible or plausible, or logical interpretation for Davison's poem, A Living Death? Is it not a stunning blueprint of the true Shakespeare's fate, his banishment, and total and painful loss of identity? The walls that shut me up from the sight of men, enclosed wherein, alive, I buried lie. Do you see any other possible or more plausible or more logical interpretation for that poem, of Francis Davison? Note: in later editions, the poem became entitled, The Passionate Prisoner. Davison, in Madrigal 8, is comparing himself with a silly fly, attracted by a lighting candle flame. She, fondly thinks, nor dead, nor burnt to be, but I, my burning, and my death foresee. Be aware that allegorical poems with insects, such as flies, moths etc., attracted and killed by bright burning candle lights, also appeared in other poems of pseudonymous Marlowe, as Bartholomew Griffin, George Wither, Giles Fletcher. Do you believe that Davison, as the other poets, Bartholomew Griffin, Giles Fletcher, or George Wither use the metaphor of the candle fly completely independently? I recommend studying and reading those authors in detail. Surprisingly, the poet Davison discloses in this poem that his muse indeed was inclined to write the famous acts of worthy brute. In plain language, he is the true author of Shakespeare's history play, Julius Caesar. Wow! What a stunning confession. Davison, in 1602, frankly declares that he, that is his muse, has written the famous Brutus monologue. A first performance of the Shakespeare play Julius Caesar was recorded in 1599. Davison composed an inscription for the statue of Dido, Queen of Carthage, with the essential ingredients of the early Marlowe theatre play. First printed 1594. What may have been the motif for Davison to compose an inscription for the statue of Dido, the Queen of Carthage? Can it be purely coincidental that Davison referred to Marlowe? Can anybody explain to me why Davison, in 1602, is praising Samuel Daniel the highest possible way? Prince of English poesy, Olympian's matchless son, eternal Daniel, thy endless name, thy muses surpassed, thy skill the greatness, thou alone matchless. What about the towering Marlowe, or Shakespeare, both of the same age, and of the same period? Why did Daniel get so disproportionately more adulation than Shakespeare in the last decade of the 16th century? It must have something to do with the never-resolved question of the identity of Samuel Daniel, related to Shakespeare's strange contextual connections to Daniel's civil wars. Does not Ode 11, to his muse, openly reveal Davison's destiny? Listen. Conceal thy skill, in thy breast, with worthy deeds. Honor great, which poets won't have. Buried deep, already in a grave, people hide his name, thereby hiding his fame. And silence is the praise their virtues crave. What another stunning confession. Davison's muse recommends concealing his skill within his breast. People, that is, each man, are hiding his name by hiding his shame. His virtues recommend he silence. Please realize, Davison, alias Marlowe, living, but banished in exile, was outlawed. He had to hide his desecrated name. In Sonnet 2, entitled, That He Cannot Hide His Affections, Davison explains how difficult it is for him to keep his inward grief from his outward show, advising himself to remain wisely masked in a disguised fashion. Consider, Shakespeare in his poems and plays combines the term outward 62 times and inward 40 times, that points unambiguously to a spiritual affinity between Davison and the true Shakespeare. Davison's poem, Love's Contrarieties, reveals Marlowe's poetic trademark, or watermark, in an absolute impressive way. That is, his dialectic, totally unmistakable, portrayal of his inner spiritual dichotomy, of his equivocalness, and of his ambiguity. How most I wish, that most I should refrain, and seek the thing, that least I long to find, and find the wound, by which my heart is slain, yet want both skill, and will to ease my mind against my will. I burnt with free consent, I live in pain and in my pain delight, I cry for death, yet are to live content, I hate the day, yet never wish for night, I freeze for cold, and yet refrain the fire, I long to see, and yet I shun her sight, I scald in Suna, and yet no shade desire, I live by death, sad yet I wish to die, I feel no hurt, and yet for help inquire, I die by life, and yet my life defy. Davison's 10 sonnets, on Philomel, allegorically symbolize the destiny of the author's muse. Having excised her, the tongue, unable to speak any more, and transformed into the bird of a nightingale, capable to sing only in night's obscurity. It is remarkable that elegiac verses, in Davison's epigram to Philip Sidney, was translated out of Jodelle, the French poet. Is it coincidental that also in Polydystomia, in 1598, Francis Maris mentions the French poet Jodelle, in connection with Marlowe? Recommending us, if we may read more of this Marlowe at large, we should read chapter 25, in Thomas Beard's, The Theatre of God's Judgment. What do we learn there, astonishingly? Or, that they might, in like manner come to destruction, and so, that abominable sin which so flourisheth amongst men of greatest name, might either be quite extinguished or at least kept under, that it durst not show its head any more in the world's eye. Any idea why these stunning revelations on Marlowe are not mentioned anywhere in the literature? Davison's sonnet, Marigold, dedicated to Mary Sidney, not only reveals the absolute emotional closeness of Davison to Mary Sidney, the Countess of Pembroke. It also is clearly reminiscent of Shakespeare's Sonnet 25, unmistakably disclosing the fatal destiny of the true Shakespeare. Finally, Davison composed in his Masque of Proteus, in Gesta Graeorum, not only an impressive general pardon, to all and every public person, and persons by way of virtue hereof, excused, suspended, and discharged from all manner, of treason, errors, charges, etc. etc. But listed even many more impressive pages, of individual complementary exceptions. Such an enormous substantial text document, can only have been conceptualized by the true Shakespeare. Let's summarize here. The most logical conclusion, from some 28 arguments presented in this video. Francis Davison, the author of A Poetical Rhapsody in 1602, is, or must have been, a pseudonym of the up to now, not correctly identified true Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe.